Europe, Mediterranean, 1st millennium BC. Due to the Orientalizing process and the connection between Iron Age cultures, many of their art forms are actually similar to each other. Orientalizing style of Assyria, Levant and Egypt was adopted and adapted by Greeks and Phoenicians, who brought it to Etruscans. The process repeated itself and spread further inland, into the lands of Hallstatt culture, making it possible to observe many parallels between the art of the barbaric communities of the north and the civilized south. Going into the 7th century BC, the first more sophisticated figural depictions of man and nature entered into alpine Europe, where only rare and crude examples existed beforehand. This came in the form of sitular art, which was marked by the creation of bronze drinking vessels, situlae, and other bronze objects, like belt plates, that carried profile depictions of animals and people partaking in a procession, ceremonial rituals, hunt and similar activities. It would be the highest form of artistic expression in the barbaric Europe during the early Iron Age. The art form, originally from the Near East, continued to be developed in the important cultural centers of that time, in present-day Bologna, Veneto, Tyrol, Lower Austria, Istria, and Slovenia, where sitular art reached its peak in the 5th century BC. Images of people and fauna through art of the early Iron Age in the continental Europe can be witnessed in other preserved objects besides those of sitular art. Most commonly depicted animals of the Iron Age include horses, hinds, rams, dogs, wolves, cats and birds. One cannot help but guess if and what symbolic meaning such beasts had and if they are connected to the spiritual and religious beliefs of that time. The motif also present is that of waterbirds, which had a big presence already in the Late Bronze Age and the Urnfield culture. These often appeared together with the motif of a sun and its many different variations, like sun disk and sunship, consequently leading to many experts naming these duck-like companions of the motif sunbirds. In general, Hallstatt culture adopted many elements from the preceding Urnfield culture. Depictions of humans during that time are rare, especially outside of sitular art. They usually include crude statuettes of warriors with their battle equipment, but can also be featured in other mediums, like bronze brooches. One type of such brooches specifically depicts a chariot, its rider, horses, and a bird. This kind of brooches have been found in the graves of women and presumably depict the legend of Phaeton, the ill-fated son of the Hellenic god Aelios. The elements of the brooch, chariot, horses, rider, and a bird, along with the accompanying amber found in the grave all point to such legend, further strengthening the idea of cultural and trade relations with not just Etruscans, but also Greeks. Bronze rattles are characteristically found in the rich graves of women, which probably took part in religious ceremonies and spiritual rituals. The motifs of a central sun, waterbirds, and a divine figure, as well as the producing sound, suggests that such rattles were used in such rituals. Bronze was not the only medium in which depictions of life and legend were created. Clay figurines of animals, presumed to be toys, were found throughout the Mediterranean and beyond. Especially interesting are the widespread horses on wheels, the origin of which can be traced to the Caucasus, Crete, and southern Italy from the 14th century onwards. Many of them fit the time frame of the creation of the Iliad and the Odyssey, perhaps accelerating their creation and reach across Europe. Other clay depictions of animals, most commonly of horned bovine heads, can be found on the handles of pottery. As for the sitular art, its depictions are not limited to the actual sitular vessels. Beautiful decorations can be found on belt buckles or belt plates of respected warriors, with similar motifs of animals and hunt and battle. Other such objects include sword scabbards, earrings, and helmets. Multiple craftsmen could work on one such object, perhaps a master and an apprentice, one on the figural depictions and another on lesser ornaments. While many such objects paint us a great picture of the skills of the craftsman and life of that time, no artifact captures this better than the bronze situlae. The situlae were made by a bronze sheet that was riveted together and fitted to a base. On top, the movable carrying handle was often twisted at the two ends. Some are more clearly shaped like a waterbird, while others are more vague. Sitular art itself was made by Tarutic method, by incising motifs through embossing and rarely engraving tiny dots and lines into a thin bronze sheet, using metal awls and small chisels. On the opposite side, the craftsman hammered out a part of the motif which they wanted to highlight. The result was a shallow relief, which brought the depictions to life. The depictions on situlae appeared in horizontal lanes or friezes, separated by a raised cordon. It's not just about creating an image, but building a narrative as well. All subjects are portrayed in profile, moving in processions. The motifs of the pictorial narrative depict hunt, competition, feasting, scenes of peasant life, animals, beasts, vegetation, all succeeding each other in the circle of life. These scenes can be understood as a multi-layered narrative of the ruler's notable events and achievements, along with their view on the afterlife, religion, and environment. The depictions themselves resemble narratives of vessels and stone engravings of the Near East civilizations, another indicator of the Orientalizing process and style of the early Iron Age. The animals depicted in sitular art, stags, ibexes, dogs, horses, and more, are those that could be observed in the life of the ancient people, though mystical beasts like sphinx and griffins also make an appearance. It is worth noting that not all situlae carried artistic depictions. Some caused wonder not through embossed ceremonies, but with size itself. The tallest among them could reach up to 90 centimeters in height. Such examples are made from multiple large pieces of bronze sheets that were then attached together with rivets. The most prominent sites of these large situlae are in the regions of River Socha and present-day Salzburg. These situlae ended up buried as grave goods to dignitaries, though it is possible that they were built beforehand and used in ritualistic ceremonies. It is not difficult to imagine the admiration these tall vessels would ignite, raised on a pedestal at a holy site, their bronze gold-like sheen reflecting the rays of sunlight or flame. But no matter how tall and awe-inspiring these giants rose among their peers, the situla found in Vache is one of the best preserved and prestigious examples of sitular art. The situla was found in a grave of a warrior from the 5th century BC. Its narrative is pictured in 3 friezes. The top one shows men of different social standings on horseback and riding chariots, with the chieftain riding in the largest carriage, wearing a conical Phrygian cap. The middle frieze shows the chieftain holding a double-headed scepter, sitting on a throne, perhaps in an enthronement ceremony. The ruler is accompanied by a man with different attire, most probably a successor or a co-ruler. This is followed by a drinking ritual and observing a match with dumbbells. After that, the successor is depicted, followed by an axe-bearer and a sacrificial ram. A similar scene can be found on a situla found on a nearby site at Magdalenska Gora, where the successor is enthroned, letting us presume that the final scene depicts the ruler's death. The birds of prey that are present along the narrative, and the animals like ibexes and hinds on the bottom frieze, symbolize death and the journey in the afterlife. Similar motifs can be found on the earliest examples of sitular art, around 600 BC. Many things about sitular art are still a mystery. As there are only few examples of written script from that area, we don't even know how those people called themselves. Further, while the narrative probably depicts ritualistic scenes based on real-life events, it could also be the case of portraying a local legend or an idealized life of a ruler. Yet despite that, this art form gives us the best insight into the Hallstatt lifestyle. The situlae displays the balance of life and death, generational succession, devouring of prey, and the contrast between human order and natural chaos. Such rituals would preserve cosmic order and were important in legitimizing the Iron Age ruler's authority, making such situlae important symbols of sovereignty. These respected dignitaries, male warriors of high status, and their retinues are the most prominent figures of sitular art. Different attire separates a procession between individuals of different standing, all to highlight the most important one among them, usually wielding a scepter, riding a carriage, or sitting on a throne. The men strove to retain or improve their position, doing so through great deeds worthy of their status, hunting or competition. In this, the sitular art resembles the ideals of archaic Greece, such as those presented in the Iliad and the Odyssey, written right during the time of the early Iron Age. While in Greece such heroic deeds and stories could be told through verse, in the continental Europe where written script wasn't so widespread, the people would instead turn to storytelling through images. As such, the world of the early Iron Age portrayed through the sitular art is one of rivalry, boasting, and men. Sitular art rarely depicts women or children, with women being usually depicted as consorts and mistresses of households. Women are also depicted with different attire, applying different status of each within the hierarchy. Interestingly, some of the most wonderful examples of sitular art have been found in the graves of women. Compared to the rich, multilayered depictions of the early sitular art, its late examples provide much more modest display. However, this is surrounded by more spacious ornamental patterns. The single frieze most usually contains processions of animals, only rarely joined by human figures. The art style became more focused on the aesthetics of the ornaments, rather than the narrative and the symbolism behind the depictions. At the end of the Hallstatt culture, the number rich graves in which such situlae would be placed also dramatically decreases. This indicates either decrease of powerful sovereigns or decrease in general prosperity and foreign trade. Frequent graves of warriors are prevalent of this era, showing turbulent times and an incoming threat. Through the 4th century BC, only individual areas maintained sitular style and art, until its eventual end with the arrival of Celts and the establishment of the La Tène culture. In the regions where the sitular art was prominent, a motif of dueling with dumbbells can often be seen. Such boxing matches were one of many ways for the aspiring warriors to prove their worth, increase their status and win prestigious rewards that would reflect their position within society. The reward is often portrayed between the two warriors fighting for it, most often a glamorous helmet. Dumbbell dueling was a refined sport, the purpose of which wasn't battle to death. It is more similar to boxing than wrestling or pancration of contemporary ancient Greece. For example, the depictions of dumbbell boxing on sitular art never show any leg technique or throws. Such elements would be very difficult to perform while holding the dumbbells. The origin, as well as purpose, is difficult to understand. It is possible that at first they were a training implement to increase the speed and strength of punches, which then gradually saw use in the official duels, similar to the use and evolution of modern boxing gloves. Similar boxing implements would also be used in ancient Greece and Rome, in the form of bandages that athletes would wrap around their hands. These would eventually become a proper glove with additional weight, sphairae in Greece and cestus in Rome. We do not know what material these dumbbells were made of, as none were archaeologically filed yet. However, that alone also gives us an insight that they probably had to be made from an organic material like wood or bone. However, we cannot exclude the possibility that the athlete simply wrapped a metallic rod with a softer cushion. An interesting hypothesis is that the athlete wanted to strike the opponent's dumbbell from his grasp. This is, however, very difficult to execute in practice, and no martial discipline of the Western world does utilize similar rules or implements. The hypothesis has very few solid arguments, mostly from depictions of a single situla. The dumbbells don't provide any cover for knuckles, making it improbable to be a defensive implement. The boxers also gave up the ability to properly deflect or manipulate opponents' strikes and body with an open palm. It would be difficult, therefore, to understand any practical use of dumbbells, besides increasing the effectiveness of punches compared to a naked fist. Any more specific details about use techniques are difficult to deduce, especially since there are no written records from that time. Sitular art presents us the best, yet still limited view of the dumbbell competitions in the early Iron Age. The closest thing are descriptions of martial competitions in ancient Greece, and despite multiple similarities that indicate its origins there, the dumbbell duels might have no connections with them in the first place. There is no simple answer to this issue. The first depictions of an ancient boxer already appear in Minoan culture on Crete, during the Bronze Age. The Iliad gives us an even more interesting potential entrance to the origins of dumbbell boxing. At the funeral games in honor of fallen Patroclus, we can witness a narrated procedure of hand-to-hand combat. Such duels are not an example of cruel gladiatorial games, but more of a sports match based on honor, agreed rules of conduct and contest of strength, all while being cheered on by the watching crowd. Both in ancient Greece and in Hallstatt culture do these hand-to-hand duels possess similar characteristics, a formal sporting ritual with rules, fighting before an audience for a reward, honor, and prestige. Both images on Greek pottery and pieces of sitular art also depict referees at the side of the competitors. Hallstatt boxing with dumbbells was a violent display of prowess that probably left athletes bruised and even more seriously injured due to the ability to use dumbbells as an enhancer of punches, as well as potential weapons. In this, it is more brutal than Greek pancration might have been, though both could potentially prove fatal to athletes that sought such opportunities to prove themselves in search of recognition and prestigious rewards. In the Hallstatt culture, such duels were to a certain extent also used to enforce and demonstrate a ruler's or a pretender's claim to rule. Despite the stylistic differences, we can therefore witness very similar motifs across different regions and cultures of Europe during the same period. The most obvious difference we find is the presence of the dumbbell in the sitular art of the Hallstatt culture. This also shows that the local craftsmen didn't just copy foreign motifs, but were showcasing their own world and customs. As preserved sources are far in between, in addition to the limited insight they can provide, we probably will never be able to accurately recreate techniques of the ancient Hallstatt boxers, but the items they left behind give us an interesting insight into the life in the early Iron Age in the heart of Europe.